Welcome back to Carolina Journal Radio. I'm Mitch Kokai. Advocates of school choice in North Carolina have had plenty of reasons to smile in 2011. Our next guest will help us recap major success stories and look ahead to areas where North Carolina still could make improvement. Darrell Allison is president of Parents for Educational Freedom in North Carolina. Thanks for joining us.
Mitch, thanks so much for having me.
So a lot of big news for school choice and school choice advocates this year. First, let's start with the easiest one to talk about, charter school cap. We've had it for a number of years. Now it's gone. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, us parental school choice advocates, I always like to stress parental because I think that's what we're really getting at, right? That parents want to have more say-so, more power and decision-making power on how best to educate their child. We're really excited about the elimination of the cap on public charter schools, not the lifting of the cap, but the elimination of the cap on public charter schools. And what that means, Mitch, is that, again, we have 100 charter schools in the state of North Carolina, but they only exist in 47 counties. There are 53 counties that don't have charters. And when you look at those 100 charter schools, we have over 30,000 families that are on waiting lists at those charter schools. And another point that I always like to make, that the urgency of now was upon us this session because we, for the first time in history, had reached the 100 cap on charters. And so there was nothing that we can do but eliminate the cap on charters so that we can meet this demand. And it's not going to be overnight, right? We have 30,000 families on waiting lists. There's process and procedures in place. We probably won't see that demand being met adequately until another 4 or 5 years or so. But I applaud our leadership in the House and Senate in pushing this measure, and I also applaud our governor for not vetoing the measure, but in fact signing the measure. And that's going to really pay huge dividends for our families down the road.
Most people probably are familiar with the term charter schools, but for those who haven't really studied this issue, what is it about charter schools that makes them something we should pursue?
Yeah, at the very fundamental level, when you really get down to the essentials, public charter schools are public schools, but less red tape, less bureaucracy, more of a communal type arrangement, meaning not all is derived from the State Board of Education and the local education entities as our traditional public school, that they have to hear by the rules and regulations of our State Board of Education, but at the very local level, the local board of that public charter school dictates, according to the charter, what the school is about, the curriculum, and there's accountability from that charter school to the State Board of Education, as opposed to our traditional schools where, they have to be accountable to the State Board of Education, but they also to the local school board. They have to, adhere to the rules and regulations there, and so it provides some regulation, some flexibility in terms of leadership. You have business leaders, folks who are not necessarily from the education establishment, if you will, that's part of the leadership for that local school, and also for the principal and teachers. With public charter schools, if I'm in urban North Carolina, and we've taken assessment of the community there, and we know that Latinos, African Americans, or those families on the lower ends of the socioeconomic level are 2 and 3 grades behind. We know that we're going to need to spend more time in the classroom. So where traditional schools may be at 6 hours in the course of a day, perhaps this charter school can adopt a model where it's 8 or 9 hours in the course of the day. And because we all know that if the students there in that community are 2 and 3 grades behind, I praise God for public extracurricular activities and sports and things of that nature. But we all know that we're going to need to make sure that there's more time in that classroom. The charter schools allow for that. Two successful models, KIPP, Knowledge is Power models, Gaston Prep, as well as KIPP School in Charlotte, have done a phenomenal job. And one of the things, Mitch, I found very interesting and very powerful is that the teachers are on an annual contract. In addition to longer hours in the classroom, those teachers outside of 4 to about 10 o'clock p.m. are contracted out to make sure that when homework time comes, when a parent needs to call, a child is having trouble with homework, they call the teacher, and that teacher has to get back to them that day. And so you can imagine you won't see that kind or hear of that kind in our traditional public schools. And so, at the fundamental level, I think it provides more flexibility to get the job done. We major on inputs, but focus should be more on outputs. And when you look at public charter schools, whether it's in the state of North Carolina or across our nation, the outputs are a little bit ahead of our traditional schools, and that's what it's all about.
Darrell Allison is president of Parents for Educational Freedom in North Carolina. If you'd like to hear what he has to say again, you can listen to the weekly Carolina Journal Radio podcast, available at carolinajournalradio.com. There were also some changes in charter school oversight, and perhaps we'll have you back in the future to talk about how those are going. But I'd like to switch gears a little bit to another school choice issue that was important this time around, and that is new tax credits for the education of children with special needs. What does that mean for families?
That's huge for families. We have, when you look at the traditional public school system in North Carolina, we have 200,000 of the million-plus students that are deemed children with disabilities. And thanks to the leadership of Paul Skip Stanton, the majority leader of the House, who's been at this for a number of years, I commend him, as well as bipartisan support. About 65% of Democrats supported the measure as well. We were able to pass the first historic measure in terms of private education in North Carolina. It's the first of its kind, and we became the 8th state in the nation to pass and measure tax credits with children with special needs. And essentially, Mitch, what it is for those families that are in the traditional public school system where no fault of the system, the type of education that's been assigned to that child is not working for them. That family will be allowed to take a non-refundable tax credit up to $6,000 in expenditures for that child's education, and that includes the opportunity for private education. Small step, but a big step. Again, when you look at the fact that all Republicans support, as well as 65% of the Democrats in the House and Senate support, it really points to something here, Mitch, that when you make the case for parental school choice, again, far too often it's a conservative issue and liberals don't like it, Democrat, Republican. When you move all that aside and you really pinpoint the issue and the crisis, I think we all can agree that our children are precious commodities. How much more are those children that have special needs? And what we saw, Democrat and Republican leadership say, hey, in this situation, we need to make an exception for these families. And so I think it lays a good foundation, again, from those issues where we see a crisis, where we know that the traditional public school system is not working for a certain segment of children. Let's look at what else we can provide those families. And so I will tell you, Mitch, that there's some things we want to see better with this tax credit measure, and we'll be working toward that. But we're ecstatic about where we are, not only with our charter schools, but also with this measure with the tax credit for children with disabilities.
Darrell Allison is president of Parents for Educational Freedom in North Carolina. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so very much.
And we'll return with more Carolina Journal Radio in a moment.